Good. Well, let's begin. We might begin by turning off our mobile phones. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming. It's very nice to have this, at least for me, this first formal, so to speak, occasion of the academic year, so well attended. Very good to see such a good turnout. Nice to see some students here. Nice to see some members of the diplomatic community, and of course our guest from NATO and his delegation. Welcome to Canberra. Welcome to ANU. Welcome to the Hedley Bull building. It's a great pleasure to have you here, and a great pleasure to have this opportunity to hear from you. Ambassador Claudio Bisogniero is the Deputy Secretary-General of NATO. He's a graduate of the University of Rome. He served in the Italian Army. He spent some time, obviously, to judge from the length of his list of former postings as a diplomat in Beijing, at NATO, in Washington DC, in New York, and a significant period working in the office of the Italian President on foreign affairs issues. Then in 2002 he went to work at NATO in a range of serious senior capacities, and since October 2007 he's occupied the very significant position of Deputy Secretary-General. It goes without saying that is time since 2002 has covered some extraordinarily complex and important and interesting periods in NATO's history. Process of enlargement, which has been going on since the end of the Cold War, a very significant question about NATO's relationship with the EU and with other European security institutions, the continuing implications of the tragedies in the Balkans in the 1990s, and the lessons drawn from that still looming very large in the way NATO thought about its future, the war on terror, and of course in particular the huge commitment that NATO has taken on in Afghanistan in that connection, and of course in the last year or so, and coming to fruition at the summit in November last year, the development of a new NATO strategic concept. One of the most important and I guess characteristic features of the way NATO has evolved over that past decade has been the way in which it has moved from an organisation which, for very understandable strategic reasons, had a very tight focus on Europe, to an organisation which has started to think much more broadly about its role in the world beyond Europe. And it's also become an organisation which has moved from, again, a very understandable focus on a very traditional conception of security and major power conflict in the most Wagnerian terms, to a much broader sense of security challenges and a much wider range of challenges, many of course with a very strong global focus. It's therefore very important and very interesting that one of the things that's happened with NATO over the last few years has been a much stronger focus on relations with countries outside Europe, on working on issues beyond Europe, which many of the trends I touched on before have had a lot to do with, and a part of that very much has been an increased NATO interest in Asia, and a much stronger interest in Australia in NATO and working with NATO, reflecting both that broader focus of NATO and, of course, the role in Afghanistan. It's therefore very appropriate and timely and interesting to hear from the Deputy Secretary-General on NATO in a globalised world. I'll ask him to speak to us, and he's kindly agreed to take questions, so after his speech I'll be happy to facilitate a Q&A session. Mr. Bisogniero.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor, for your introduction, and I will not even try to, in the interest of audience survival, I won't even try to address all the issues that you mentioned, but luckily we do have a Q&A session in the end, so whoever is interested in all of those points, we can address them later on. And congratulations for the research. Anyone who's been involved in this, for digging out those pictures, I think it's very nice. It provides a variety of what we're doing at NATO in a number of situations, the Balkans, piracy, Afghanistan, and so on. These are complicated times for many of our countries. Natural disasters impact many of our nations significantly, and this is also true for Australia. And so let me express at the outset my thoughts and my sympathy for the tragic situation with the floodings and the rainstorms and the tragic losses that have occurred in this country. And on that issue also you have all of NATO's support from us in Brussels. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me thank the Strategic and Defense Studies Center for its generous hospitality today. I understand it's the first day back to work in many ways, so I hope I will not disappoint you. But I do know that this center, since its inception, has developed in a very important way, becoming a key actor in the security and strategic thinking in this country, and reflecting also Australia's growing international role. So I'm particularly pleased to be here. And I would like today to discuss three broad issues. First of all, I would like to discuss with you the dramatic changes in our security environment and the need for international engagement to address those changes. I would like then to discuss our evolving role in Afghanistan. And finally, I would like to mention the outcome of the very important summit that NATO had in Lisbon in the month of November, and the future of the relationship between Australia and NATO. And on this point, let me say that despite our geographical distance, which is a fact, our relationship has flourished in the past few years because we share common values and we face common security threats and challenges. And we can only be successful in addressing those challenges if we do it together, if we work together. We live in a globalized world. By now it's a cliche, but it's actually true. Borders are more and more open. Actually, in Europe, many borders have disappeared altogether. Travel is affordable and easy for many people around the world. The internet allows all of us instant access to information and the free flow of information anywhere in the world. Money flows through and around borders have also developed with the same ease. And so all of this brings great benefits. Globalization brings enormous benefits in terms of freedom, in terms of prosperity, in terms of development. However, alongside these benefits, the openness created by globalization may also change, in a way, the security environment, because security threats also have become globalized. We are in 2011. It is the 10th anniversary of 9/11. Obviously, that devastating terrorist attack against the United States that killed almost 3,000 people, but it actually killed people from many nations around the world, and I do know that several Australians, unfortunately, were killed in that attack. And many more were killed in the Bali bombings the following years. By now, Al-Qaeda and Jamaat Islamiyah have developed into a new breed of international terrorist organizations. But it is even more complicated. If you think about it, from the Caucasus through the Horn of Africa, to Central Asia, to Southeast Asia, fragile states, failing states, have become the hotbeds for organized crime and for the trafficking of people, trafficking of weapons, of narcotics. And this is where terrorists find recruits, where they can set up their training camps and where they can plot their attacks with impunity. So failing states are a major threat today. So it's a complex set of interrelationships in front of us. But the overall pattern is clear. And the result is an unmistakable and present danger to our citizens and to the stability of the international system. In today's security environment, geography is no more a safeguard. Distance is no more a deterrent. And isolation, I don't think it's anymore a viable policy option. So we need a new thinking. We need a new ways of doing business. We need a global integrated response. We call it a comprehensive approach with much greater cooperation between states, international organizations, international financial institutions, but also the private sector or even NGOs, all working together in new ways. We at NATO have been a strong advocate of this new kind of international arrangement for many years today, and we have been an important platform for putting this comprehensive approach into practice. And nowhere is this illustrated better than in Afghanistan. And this brings me to my second point today. Afghanistan, where NATO, at the request of the Afghan government and under the mandate of the UN Security Council, is leading a unique multinational coalition for peace. Our International Security Assistance Force, it's called ISAF, as you know, is made of 48 countries today, all 28 NATO allies, but also 20 other nations from all over the world. And of course, Australia is the strongest non-NATO contributor to ISAF, and you are contributing across the whole spectrum of our mission, from combat troops to trainers to aid. And our common aim is to help create a stable Afghanistan, a peaceful Afghanistan, that will never again be a safe haven for terrorists and for threats to our nations. Our mission in Afghanistan is a very demanding mission. It's a mission in which, regrettably, many of our soldiers, many of our brave soldiers have been killed or wounded. And may I take this opportunity to offer my heartfelt condolences to the families and to the loved ones of the brave Australian soldiers that lost their life in Afghanistan. The last one just a few days ago, as you know, Corporal Richard Atkinson. And I would like to assure all of you that their noble sacrifice has not been in vain. But despite these challenges, despite these many challenges, we are making progress in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda, which once had training camps all over Afghanistan, has been dealt a very heavy blow. And the Taliban are under pressure everywhere. Progress is painstaking, progress is hard-fought, but our resolve is strong, our strategy is sound, and we now have in place the necessary resources to accomplish this task. And as a matter of fact, this year, 2011, is going to be a crucial year for Afghanistan. We will start transition to hand over the lead security responsibility to the Afghans themselves, province by province, so that they assume the responsibility for the security in their own country. And our aim, the objective, is to complete transition by 2014. But this process will not be driven by the calendar, it will be driven by the conditions on the ground, and we will transition, as I said, province by province, based on a sober assessment of the political situation, of the security situation in each of those provinces. Because when and where we do transition, we want the process to be irreversible. So our aim is clear. Afghanistan should stand on its own, but it will not stand alone. The role of ISAF forces will gradually shift from a combat role to training and supporting the Afghan forces. And in fact, at the Lisbon Summit, at the NATO Lisbon Summit, NATO and Afghanistan signed a long-term partnership agreement to demonstrate that we will continue to support the Afghan people even beyond 2014, of course, in a different role. And given our shared experience, I have no doubt that Australia will show that same commitment to the long-term stability and security in Afghanistan. In Lisbon, Prime Minister Gillard took part in a summit meeting of the leaders of all the 48 ISAF countries, together with also President Karzai of Afghanistan, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon of the United Nations, and leaders of the European Union and of Japan. It was a very strong demonstration of the resolve, of the determination of the whole international community to help build a peaceful Afghanistan and a secure Afghanistan. However, the summit in Lisbon was not only about our engagement in Afghanistan. At the summit, we adopted also a number of very important decisions that pertain to NATO in a globalized world. The heads of state and government of the 28 NATO allies reaffirmed very strongly, very clearly, the bond to collective defense that is at the heart of the NATO alliance. But also, they agreed on a new strategic concept, a roadmap, if you wish, that sets out the nature and the goals and the tasks of NATO for the next 10 years or so. We've taken a number of important decisions at the summit, as I said. First, we decided a number of ways in which we are going to make NATO more effective in meeting not only the traditional threats, but also the new emerging challenges and threats to our security in areas such as cyber attacks, piracy, proliferation, terrorism. We also identified in Lisbon a top 10 list of key military capabilities for our forces, including, for instance, helicopter transport, medical support, and the countering of the roadside bombs. And we are going to focus our attention and our resources on those key necessary capabilities. We also decided that NATO will develop a NATO missile defense system, a missile defense to protect our territory against the growing threat of ballistic missiles. And we took the historic decision to invite Russia to participate in this effort. Second, in addition to making NATO more effective, we also took steps in Lisbon to make the alliance more efficient, to eliminate, to stop doing what we do not need anymore, and to focus our efforts and to invest where our real needs are. This will imply a stronger effort on multinational solutions to acquire and operate jointly key defense capabilities. It will imply a significant streamlining of the NATO command structure and a significant reduction of the NATO agencies. We are at a time of a severe international financial crisis. I don't think anybody in this room can imagine defense budgets growing in the near future, so we need to make a better use of those limited resources that we have available. And we also have to show our general public that we're making this particular effort. The leaders of NATO decided in Lisbon that today's security challenges, from terrorism, proliferation to cyber attack, require much closer cooperation between nations and organizations. So the NATO leaders decided to offer to all of our partners around the globe, including Australia, more dialogue and a closer cooperation than ever before. We also took important decisions pertaining to Russia, and we are particularly pleased that together with President Medvedev, we were able to launch a new phase of the NATO-Russia relationship. I mentioned to you already the invitation to Russia to participate with us in missile defense, but we also agreed to step up the cooperation with Russia, for instance, on Afghanistan, or to fight terrorism, proliferation, and piracy. Now, I want to be clear on this point. This does not mean that we see eye to eye with Russia on everything. There are areas in which we maintain significant disagreements of principle, such as Kosovo, Georgia, the enlargement of NATO. Where we do agree is that NATO and Russia will continue to focus not on what divides us, but on what we can achieve together. Besides Russia, we also took important decisions at Lisbon on the partnerships of NATO. And the summit decided to work on the modernization and the strengthening of alliances, partnerships. What is our objective? Well, our aim is to make partnerships more effective, more efficient, more flexible, and more relevant to today's requirements. And when I say today's requirements, I don't only mean NATO's requirements. I'm also thinking about the requirements and the concerns of our partners. So at this time, we are engaged at the NATO headquarters in making our partnership policy updating and making it more suitable for today's needs. And we are doing this in close consultation with our partners to make sure that their views are also duly reflected. As I mentioned, like Australia, more and more of our partners are involved with us in the NATO-led operations, be it in the Balkans, be it in Afghanistan, be it in the Mediterranean Sea, or in the counter-piracy operations off the coast of Somalia. One concern of our partners that are involved with us in operations, a concern which is shared by Australia, is to be more involved, to have a greater say in the planning and in the conduct of those operations and in the decision shaping for those operations. I think it is only fair if a country contributes resources and troops to an operation, it is only right that the country has the possibility to contribute to the discussions and to the decision-shaping process for those operations. We are also taking a close look at how we can contribute to making the partners the partners' forces and defense sectors more effective, and thereby we have, since we have a long tradition at NATO in military training and education, we want to allow greater access for our partners to our knowledge and to facilitate their efforts in defense sector reform. Why? Because interoperability is a very important element of our interaction with our partners. Of course, interoperability is less of a concern for a country like Australia, which has modern military forces with considerable experience in working together with NATO and with individual allies. But over and beyond our operational cooperation, I see considerable scope not only for intensifying the NATO-Australia political dialogue, but also for strengthening our practical cooperations in many areas, among which counterterrorism, non-proliferation, and cyber defense. And I'm pleased that those are the same areas that the Australian government has also identified as areas of particular interest in. And this was reflected also in what I heard during my talks here in Canberra today. Why is this? Because the areas I mentioned to you, once again, proliferation, terrorism, cyber attacks, are of interest not only to Australia but also to NATO. So these are areas in which we can learn from each other and in which we can make our partnership a genuine two-way street. Of course, Afghanistan has always been an important driver behind the NATO-Australia relations, but our relationship has also intensified because Australia shares NATO's understanding that not only Afghanistan, but many of our security challenges require a qualitatively new level of international dialogue and cooperation, and NATO is very much committed to that. Australia has clearly demonstrated their awareness in all of its dealings with the alliance in these past few years, including in the very welcome suggestions that you made, that Australia made during the process that led us to the adoption of the new strategic concept, which was also drafted in consultation with our partners. Ladies and gentlemen, while globalization may have changed aspects of our security environment, I'm convinced that we can continue to make it work in our favor. How? By standing together, by sharing the risks and burdens of security, and by developing new ways for dialogue and cooperation across the globe. That is very much NATO's approach to security today. And we're very pleased to see that it is also Australia's approach. It should allow NATO and Australia to further deepen our relations and to become true security partners. Thank you for your attention.
Well, Ambassador Bisogniero, thank you very much for that very elegant coverage of a very broad and very interesting set of issues. Well, happy to throw the floor open to questions. Who'd like to begin? What a shy bunch they are. Yes, please. Please identify yourself.
Yes, I am a diplomat from Mauritius, and I think I'm the only one from an African country here. So let me ask you a question about Africa. But before that, Excellency, I would say that I have also worked in Beijing and Washington, D.C., so my duty is of course our part.
No doubt.
So as you spoke about failed states, you know Somalia is one of the largest, if not the largest failed state in Africa. And Somali pirates have been creating havoc in the Gulf of Aden, and now they have extended their base of operation into the Indian Ocean, south of Indian Ocean as well as west of Indian Ocean. Mauritius is one of those small island states in the Indian Ocean that has been affected to a great extent, like Madagascar, like Seychelles, Comoros, so on and so forth. Now, in the international community, there have been concerns, or there have been proposals that we should create a NATO naval force to patrol the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean region to prevent pirates from attacking vessels, containers, and oil tankers. I would like to know your assessment on this suggestion and whether it is feasible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you are right in the sense that one of the slides will actually show one of those operations. We'll get to it, hopefully, before I conclude the answer. How did it happen? Well, in September 2008, Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, wrote to a series of international organizations, including NATO, asking for help against piracy, for protection against piracy, for the vessels of the World Food Programme that were delivering humanitarian aid to Somalia, where incidentally 2.5 million people are dying because of the lack of food. And NATO was the first one to react to this request. We were able to assemble a small, I wouldn't call it a fleet, a small group of vessels, 4 or 5 vessels, and we have been patrolling those waters since then. The operation is today called Ocean Shield, and it is now approved until the end of this year, and we'll see for the future. However, we are not the only ones present out there. There is a European Union mission, it is called Atalanta. There is a US-led task force, it's called TF-151. And then there are quite a number of individual states, ranging from Japan to India, from China to Russia to the Republic of Korea. So you see, once again, it's a true collective effort by the international community, which has been started by this request emanating from the United Nations, to which we have responded positively. It's a very wide stretch of sea out there. It's a very wide ocean. So there is room for everybody, unfortunately, in trying to tackle this threat. And luckily enough, there is a coordination mechanism. It's called SHADE. It's a deconflicting format in which all of these people that I mentioned to you meet. It takes place in Bahrain, and it allows for all of these entities to act in an efficient way without stepping on each other's feet. But so we are committed to this effort as well.
Thank you. Yes.
I think Ambassador, my name is Greg Collins. I'm from the PhD department here. I'm a PhD student in the Department of International Relations. Thank you for your talk. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit to, you have highlighted that in a globalised world we have these emanating threats coming from sub-state actors and the growing issues that are related to that. And we've spoken about the failed states theory as well. I guess what I'd like you to talk a little bit more about with is the relative prioritisation then of threats that emanate from these sub-state regions to the states, or whether this is being taken on as a more individual level. I guess the issue that we're sort of trying to tease out here is that what is the way in which NATO is approaching the prioritisation of these threats coming from individual failed states as a threat to states, or as something that we need to engage with in the international community for a more detailed concern for individuals. I was wondering. It's probably very complex.
Right. It's not easy to respond to this question, particularly in a short time, but I will try to do so. I think it's a fact of life that the security environment has dramatically changed. Here, by the way, for our colleague from Russia, is the operation we are conducting in the anti-piracy in the Gulf of Aden. It's a fact of life that security challenges have dramatically changed, and we have new emerging challenges that just did not exist even 10 years ago. If you read the 1999 strategic concept, which I strongly suggest you do not, because it's extremely long. It is nothing like this. It's long, repetitive, so don't read it. But if you do read it, you will find, I think, nothing about piracy and cyber attacks and some of these issues. I think, frankly speaking, and mind you, it was only 2 years before 9/11. I think if you do read it, you will see that on terrorism there was not even that much. So at that time, international terrorism, it is mentioned, but not with the relevance that one would expect, given what happened just 24 months later. So security environment is changing. We need to adjust our way of work and of thinking even to these new challenges, identifying, as you are hinting, the real priorities. And this is why, incidentally, at the summit in Lisbon, as I mentioned, we have approved a top 10 list, which has nothing to do with David Letterman, but it's the top 10 list of the key military capabilities in which we need to focus our efforts and our funds and our resources. And the key element is, can we do this alone? Because also in answering to the question from our colleague a moment ago, and he mentioned Africa, and yes, we are engaged in Africa, and we will have to address a variety of threats and challenges when they emerge. This is the great change of NATO compared to the NATO of the time of the Cold War. At the time of the Cold War, NATO was a purely defensive organization for the protection of the territory of the alliance. Since the end of the Cold War, we have become a security organization able to project security and stability in a wider area. But as I say this, I want to make one point very clear. We have no ambition to be the global policeman. We are not the global cop, and we do not want to become the global cop. frankly speaking, we don't even have the resources to do it. So prioritization becomes essential, and equally essential is cooperation with other international actors, so that we can combine our respective strong points to solve these problems.
Yes, Andrew.
Thank you for your presentation, Ambassador. I'm Andrew Fox from the Department of International Relations. I wanted to press you, if I could, on the issue of prioritisation. You made a very excellent presentation talking about the way in which the security environment has changed in the last 10 years, the ascendancy of non-state threats, the decreased salience of failed states. And you were also very eloquent in talking about the extraordinary resource constraints that NATO is now facing. So just to be a dogmatic traditionalist for the moment, I'm just curious in terms of NATO's posture and the strategic concept. To be provocative, is NATO giving up the game of being able to be capable of mass conventional warfare? And if not, what does that say about the extent to which the security environment has really fundamentally changed?
The answer to the first question is no, and it goes without saying, because the commitment to collective defense, the Article 5 commitment reflected in the Washington Treaty, by which an external attack, an armed attack against any of the 28 nations is an attack against all the 28 nations, and the 28 are all committed to defend each other. This fundamental pillar of the alliance has not changed and will not change. And it will remain reflected in our force posture, in our defense planning, in our capabilities. This goes without saying. But we cannot close our eyes in front of these security threats and challenges. Who would have imagined those threats that I mentioned just a moment ago? So we need to be able to do more things at the same time better. We need to restructure our military instrument in a more flexible way, in a more deployable way, in a more sustainable way once it is engaged in operations. But we absolutely must be able to tackle those new challenges. One challenge, for instance, is missile defense. That was not a perceived challenge until just a few years ago, but today it is. And this is why we've had to add this to the list of things that we must do, without being the global policeman, once again. But the major change compared to the time of the Cold War is that today we realize that there are security threats to our cities, to our populations, that can emerge very far away from our borders, and we must be able to engage those as well. So it's a matter of combining the needs to tackle those multiple challenges.
Yes.
Thanks very much for your interesting presentation. I'm just interested in the question of something Professor Hugh White has written very extensively on, and that's the emergence of China. I wonder if you could take a moment to reflect and elaborate on what the strategic position of NATO is in relation to its dialogue and cooperation and discourse with that possible threat.
Thank you. Yes, China is a country with which we have a dialogue. The dialogue started in 2002, when China for the first time approached us in Brussels. And since then we have maintained a regular dialogue with China on a variety of policy and security issues. It is conducted at senior level officials that either go to Beijing or Chinese officials coming to NATO. Last year we've also had for the first time a senior PLA, so military mission coming to the NATO commands in Europe, so it was quite an important step. And as a matter of fact, in December 2009, I was invited by the Chinese to visit China and it was in a way raising the level, if you wish, of this political dialogue, and we had a very successful dialogue with China. One of the principles of the new strategic concept is that not only are we going to strengthen and to expand and to make more flexible the existing partnerships, but we are also going to reach out to new actors around the globe who share our approach for peaceful international relations. So we are now, as I mentioned earlier, in the process of revising the NATO's partnership policy, and so we are going to see how to address these new emerging powers around the world.
Thank you, Ambassador Bisogniero. My name is Midrange. I work for the research branch of the Parliamentary Line, currently advising members and senators of the Parliament precisely these issues, so thank you so much for being here. My quick two questions are, what do you see as Australia's role, if any, in NATO's proposed missile defence shield? And the second quick question is, one of the concerns of the Australian government over the years, successive governments, has been, and a complaint really, that we didn't have access to top-level strategic planning, in particular, to missions that we contribute to. Do you think that this will change with increased political and practical dialogue in the future? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And by the way, tomorrow I will have the great pleasure of meeting quite a number of high-ranking members of parliament of several parties. So I'm looking forward to those meetings tomorrow. Beside defense, well, one has to realize that what we're talking about here is mid-range ballistic missiles. So these are missiles that from, let's say, the Middle East will be able to reach Europe. So we are talking about a range, if that is the origin of the threat, we're going about a range of about 2,000 kilometers. So we have made an offer to Russia for obvious geographical reasons. Ukraine is also there, if you wish, and actually the formal decision that we took also makes the point that we are open to cooperation with other countries in the European continent, once again for obvious geographical reasons. So that's the answer to your first question. The second point, I think, is a very fair point, and I think I addressed it in passing in my presentation, meaning I think it is only fair that a nation who contributes to a mission putting its soldiers at risk has every right to participate in the decision-making process, to have access to the relevant information, etc. Situation has dramatically improved since a couple of years, since when Australia and New Zealand and others started making this point. And right now, I can tell you very frankly, we nearly only discuss ISAF in the expanded format of 48. So the issue is frankly, to a large extent, solved. I heard appreciation today when I met the defense officials on this particular point. And we are now going to formalize those improvements in a written document so that there is no doubt that this will happen also in the future. Kathy.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. My name is Catherine Morton from the Department of International Relations. You opened your remarks by saying that common security with threats require common values in order to respond to them. And following on from the earlier question by Fan, I'm wondering that to the extent that you have changing security challenges, a changing security environment, of course you also have changing power distribution within the international system, which begs the question, to what extent do you think it would be possible to engage with new partners, to engage with new emerging powers in the absence of shared values?
Right. First, I think I should clarify my comment because it was slightly different. So I did not say that common security challenges require common values. I said that we are distant geographically, NATO and Australia. However, we, NATO and Australia, are united by common values and by having to address common security challenges. So that is what I said, and of course it would be ideal to be able to only work internationally with countries who share our international values. The world is a much more complicated place. It's a much more pragmatic place, and there are diplomats in this room. Some of you, I hope, will be one day foreign service officials, and there has to be a pragmatic approach in which one does not abdicate, obviously, the profound belief in the need to pursue those values, but there are also ways of cooperating together in a pragmatic way.
Thank you, Ambassador. My name is Eric Mangajaya. I'm from Indonesia. I work for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I am a student here taking Master of International Affairs and Master of Diplomacy. It is interesting that you mentioned about the comprehensive approach that you agreed in 2010. And then I still remember what the Secretary General of the NATO said, that the idea of comprehensive approach is compelling, but it is difficult to implement because I think each state has its own approach and policy to each strategies and also threats. And then he proposed three elements, 1, 2, and 3, but he mentioned about the military and civil cooperation, and then NGOs and etc., as you mentioned also in your presentation. My question is, how can each state in NATO can take a policy according to the rules and regulation, according to their policy, if they have different opinion, different approach to each threats? Because I think it's difficult, NGOs and government cooperation in dealing with security. And then the next question, are we going to make it to be a privatization of the security? Or maybe how can we deal with the war or hard power concept? If it is dealing with environment, I think it's easier because NGOs and state can cooperate in dealing with environment. But in piracy, I cannot imagine that concept. Thank you, Ambassador.
Yes, I mean, let me clarify this concept because I think it's very, very important. Comprehensive approach. What do we mean by comprehensive approach? I think your question is very, very relevant. And frankly, comprehensive approach is the great lesson that we draw from Afghanistan. And what is this great lesson? And the lesson is very easy, that contemporary security crisis cannot be addressed and solved by military means only. This is what we learned in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, we need a combination of military security effort, and that is very important because without security, you cannot do much else. But you also need a civilian effort. Economic development, reconstruction, institution building, law and order. Can we, NATO, do all of this? Obviously not. It's well beyond our capabilities. It's well beyond our institutional task. So we need to act together in the international community. Those different actors who possess these kind of different capabilities. And that's when I mentioned our interaction with the United Nations, with the European Union, the World Bank, etc. So this is how we feel that the comprehensive approach should develop, with each of those organizations and entities, or even nations, for instance, retain their individual prerogatives. There is no intent whatsoever that one or the other of these organizations should abdicate from its founding principles, if you so wish. Let me also add that in a comprehensive approach that involves NATO, the United Nations, we have no ambition to coordinate others. Actually, to be perfectly frank with you, in a civilian effort setting, we are perfectly ready to be coordinated by others. And when I say be coordinated by others, obviously I refer mainly to the United Nations, who should exercise this coordinating role of all the different entities present on the ground. So this is what we mean by a comprehensive approach, which, yes, could also involve the private sector, because there will be a moment in a post-crisis situation in which reconstruction will be necessary, and reconstruction can only be done with the involvement, under certain conditions obviously, of the private sector. And yes, this can also involve NGOs, because there are certain areas in which NGOs are perfectly equipped to address certain social, health, medical needs of the populations on the ground, all areas in which NATO has no role whatsoever. And by the way, if the NGOs are involved, their independence should be absolutely respected.
Thank you so much for your lecture. My name is Shazad. I just finished my high school last year in Japan. I would like to ask you about the NATO's attitudes toward the Asia, especially the Central Asia. It has been claimed that there is a serious aggression of human rights in the western part of People's Republic of China, called Xinjiang Uyghur region. So in order to establish, build a true peace or egalitarianism that we have in Australia and prevent harsh persecutions, what is the NATO's attitudes and role in these regions in these Central Asia from the perspective of human security?
Right. Well, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, one should not expect NATO to be the global actor on all global issues. And this is quite a surprising trend that I often detect when I have a Q&A session and some interesting questions like yours emerge. On the one hand, sometimes NATO is criticized because it's doing too much, and then at the same time it's also criticized because it is doing too little. So I mean, I'm ready to any discussion, any argument. And by the way, before I forget, if I understand correctly, you are from Japan, and NATO has also been developing a very fruitful dialogue and cooperation with Japan, and Japan is making an exceptional contribution in terms of economic support and aid to Afghanistan. And so it's a very much well-respected party of nation in this endeavor, and this is why Japan participated in the ISAF meeting ISAF summit, actually, in Lisbon. So this is how I would a little bit answer your question. We cannot address all the global issues from hunger. Someone mentioned piracy earlier on, and of course, does any of us in this room believe that we're going to solve the problems, wrong slide, the problem of piracy through sending some frigates and military vessels off the waters of Somalia? Obviously not. By doing that, we're going to protect our shipments, which is absolutely essential for global economy, etc. But the problem of piracy will be solved on the ground, on land, in Somalia. Should NATO do that? Obviously not. There are other actors who are engaged in that particular endeavor.
Stefan, we better make this the last.
Stefan Frühling from the Strategic Defence Studies Centre. It seems to me that NATO has changed quite a lot in recent years, I guess, with the certainly opening towards, like, as what you've described as the new international security order. But at the same time, European defence budgets, as you said, are under pressure. There's been significant decisions to cut force structure, for example, in Germany and in Britain, with one hears very little consultation among with allies, and primarily in the national framework first. So my question to you is, do you find that the laudable kind of attention that NATO is paying to engagement with other countries, to engaging in an ever-increasing number of corners of the globe, I guess, has been diverted political attention from what I would call the traditional strengths of NATO, which, for example, lies in force structure coordination and a lot of the back office, if you want, issues of coordinating force structure and defense policy, which we've seen kind of like build up over the decades during the Cold War.
It's a very relevant question. In a way, it's linked to what your colleague was saying earlier. The NATO defense planning mechanism exists, and it will continue to exist. Actually, we have recently reformed it to make it more efficient and more updated. So that will continue, and I can tell you that, for instance, the United Kingdom, when they announced these important reductions, the restructuring of the armed forces, well, first of all, they came to consult with us. We met senior officials from the UK who informed us before the decision was announced, but also they made the point very clearly that the United Kingdom will continue to commit to some of those principles, actually commitments, that are embedded in the NATO planning mechanism. For instance, 2% of GDP in defense spending. Well, that commitment will continue to be respected by the UK, and I can tell you actually that very few countries in NATO respect that commitment, but in spite of that, in spite of the cuts, the United Kingdom continues to do that. So I don't see a major contradiction. The contradiction is in the fact that we are going to have in the future a variety of needs competing for scarce resources, and this is a fact in all of our nations. In the general government budget situation, and more specifically in the defense budget situation. However, I think that NATO has always been a cost saver, because we have always developed joint programs, collective programs, and frankly speaking, it's much cheaper to develop one single type, for instance, of aircraft, instead of making 5 different airplanes in 5 different nations. And the same applies to tanks and radars and telecommunication. I could go on and on and on. So we have a long tradition of joint programs that, as I said, have been a real cost saver for the nations. And this is going to continue. We are going to do more collaborative programs in the future, more joint activities with the intent of having economies of scale and thereby reducing the impact for the individual nations. So this is how I would respond to your question.
Okay. Ambassador, you've had a long day at the end of what I know is a very long flight. You've got a long day ahead of you, and we've worked you pretty hard in the last hour. You've been very generous with your time and with your views, and we really appreciate that. Could I thank the Ambassador's colleagues for joining us this afternoon? Could I thank our friends from the Diplomatic Corps for joining us? It's always nice to build that connection. Our friends from government, different bits of government, and of course our own students and colleagues who are here. But most of all, could I thank you, Ambassador, very much, and could I offer you this small token?
Thank you very much.